Around 2.8 million years ago, the first ancestors of modern humans appeared. Homo habilis. Homo habilis had evolved to become a scavenger in the African environment. It had many unique features which allowed it to be quite efficient at this. But if someone was to look through a time capsule without any prior knowledge of what the genus Homo would become, they would have never guessed that these guys would become the most efficient predators that the world has ever seen. Like I said, some of the earliest humans around 2.8 million years ago were scavengers in the African plains and forests, having extremely strong stomach acid and large stomachs to digest meat. Raw meat, which was usually rotten meat as well. But of course they ate some other things, fruits and plants. They weren't exclusively carnivores, they were opportunistic omnivores. They also used primitive tools, believe it or not. They sharpened stones to cut flesh with. And assuming that they ate bone marrow, which they most certainly did because that is a very important part of most scavenger diets, they must have had something to break bones with as well. But they were far from these great predators that we would eventually become. Now meet Homo erectus, the first humans that were in fact apex predators. They had longer legs and more efficient sweating, making them the perfect persistence hunters around 2 million years ago. The most important thing to improve, however, was cognitive ability. They could now put together more coordinated hunts, possibly even lead animals into traps or off of cliffs. However, there is something very interesting here. Homo erectus became such a good hunter, it started to migrate to places no human had ever gone before, and before long, they had wandered across southern Eurasia all the way to the islands of Indonesia and Malaysia. Now, whether they reached these islands with a primitive raft or boat is unknown. It could have also been an accidental sort of land boat that carried them there. But anyways, Homo erectus was probably also responsible for overhunting and destroying many animal populations that it came across. An example of this is a giant tortoise called Megalocelos. They also used some much more advanced tools like spears and axes, and around 300 and 400,000 years ago, populations started to consistently and efficiently control the single most important discovery in human history, fire. Fire allowed us to go to places that were impossible to reach otherwise. It allowed us to hunt better. Fire changed our entire biology. You see, when we control fire, we cook our food. And we cook our food because it is much easier to digest that way, and also it tastes better. Because it is much easier to digest, we don't need that big stomach that takes up a ton of energy. So it started to shrink. It started to use up less energy, and that excess energy went up here to our cognitive. Right as I'm talking about cognitive abilities, I start to fucking lose my mind. Anyways, this improved our cognitive abilities. During the next part of our history, it became undisputed. We were the dominant species around the globe. Well, almost the entire globe, because we hadn't reached the Americas yet. We could now hunt megafauna and huge game like mammoths, rhinos, bison, so on, leading us to compete with many other predators who we most likely outcompeted. Neanderthals, the human species best adapted to the cold, harsh environments up north, could chase down these megafauna with ease, and it is even thought by some that they hunted other predators like bears and big cats. Let's go to around 12 to 10,000 years ago, pretty much the end of the last ice age. Humans across the Bering Strait dominating the Americas as well. Many animal populations were dropping due to the massive shift in global temperatures. Combine that with us, an extremely efficient apex hunter, whose population was not going down. In fact, our population was going up. Much of the megafauna that had adapted to the cold of the Ice Age now saw themselves being devastated. Woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant sloths, although there are some theories that the giant sloth might still be alive. Who knows? Ancient buffaloes, deer, bison, all being wiped out by humans, and as a consequence, many of the predators that relied on these larger prey saw themselves dying out as well. Saber-toothed cats, short-faced bears are just two examples. Needless to say, this was pretty insane. However, the one place where humans did the most damage single-handedly is most likely Australia. Because the Ice Age played a factor in why we could wipe out all these giant animals all of a sudden. But in Australia, we were there around 50,000 years ago. That's when humans presumably reached Australia. We don't really know how, but we did. And almost immediately, the fossil records show that when the first humans arrived, many of the fascinating marsupial megafauna was wiped out, never to be seen again. This is most of human history, just hunting and gathering, and so it's not surprising that we were really, really good at it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Bye!